The clock struck 6 a.m. in the Harrington estate, a mansion where wealth had long overshadowed warmth. William Harrington, 73, lay motionless in his mahogany study chair, his gaze locked on the flames crackling in the stone fireplace. Papers surrounded him, contracts, bank statements, and one particular document trembling in his hand, his last will and testament. Something in his gut told him that his time was running out, and with it, the illusion of control over his legacy. And this morning, he intended to rewrite the future. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. "Call Ethan," he told his butler with a gravelly urgency. Now, Ethan, his only son, had just returned from a business trip to Dubai. Tall, composed, and too trusting for William's liking, Ethan had inherited the heart of his mother and the blind optimism of youth. But that very optimism, William feared, could cost the family everything, because Ethan had fallen in love with someone William didn't trust, and time to intervene was slipping through his fingers. Charlotte Reynolds was the kind of woman who made heads turn. With her magazine cover, smile, impeccable manners, and curated charm, she had all the marks of someone raised in high society. But William, a self-made tycoon, had met too many people who wore masks, and Charlotte's felt too perfect, too rehearsed. It wasn't that she was openly manipulative, it was that she never made mistakes. And William had learned that real people always did. As William watched Ethan enter the study, a wave of emotion struck him. His son looked genuinely happy, hopeful even. That was the problem. "Sit down," William said simply, his tone heavier than usual. Ethan obeyed, sensing the gravity of the moment. William handed him the freshly amended will. "You need to read this, son, every word." Ethan frowned, but took the document. "What is this, Dad?" "A safeguard," William replied. "For you, for everything we've built." Ethan's eyes scanned the clauses, confusion blooming. "You added a clause, conditional inheritance?" "Yes," William said. "You won't inherit unless you marry someone who truly loves you. Not the empire, not the name, you." "That's extreme," Ethan muttered. William leaned in. "If she's who you say she is, she'll pass the test." Ethan stiffened. "What test?" William didn't answer. He stood slowly, walked to the fireplace, and stared into the flames again. "Some people show you their soul when they think you're nobody. I intend to find out who she really is." "Dad, please, don't do this," Ethan pleaded. "You're going too far. Too far is losing everything to someone who only wants the crown," William growled. There was a silence thick enough to choke on. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, wrestling with his loyalty. "She's not like that, you'll see." William turned, eyes hard. "I hope to God you're right, because I'm going undercover and no one, not even you, will know where I am." "What?" Ethan stood. "You can't just disappear." But William was already packing his bag. That evening, William left Harrington Manor as someone else, gone were the silk suits and leather loafers. In their place, a faded jacket, weathered boots, and a grey cap pulled low. His Bentley was replaced by a modest rental car, and his watch, worth more than some houses, was locked in a drawer. He became George Walker, a retired mechanic seeking work at one of his own resorts, a ghost among kings. The following day, Charlotte arrived at Azure Haven, the flagship resort William had built from scratch. Ethan had insisted they spend time there before announcing their engagement. Charlotte beamed at the ocean view, sipped imported champagne, and posed for pictures she claimed were just for memories, though her followers on social media would soon disagree. William, as George, observed her from the shadows. He got a job as a maintenance assistant, thanks to a favor from an old friend in management. Nobody suspected anything. George was just another aging worker with creaky knees and stories from a past life. But behind his humble disguise, William watched Charlotte like a hawk, noting every interaction, every moment she thought no one important was watching. He fixed leaky pipes near the spa, scrubbed floors in the conference hall, carried boxes she didn't see. And still, every time their paths crossed, Charlotte never noticed him. Not a nod, not a smile, not a flicker of acknowledgement. To her, he was invisible, just another blur in her curated world. But William knew how to be patient. Tests don't work if the subject knows they're being watched. The real Charlotte would eventually reveal herself, not in grand gestures, but in small cruelties, subtle decisions. It was just a matter of time, and William had time for now. Because the truth wasn't in what Charlotte said, it was in what she did when no one was supposed to be watching. George, once William Harrington, woke before sunrise, his joints aching from the thin mattress in the maintenance quarters. Gone were the days of memory foam and Egyptian cotton. He poured black coffee from a chipped thermos and walked the winding paths of Azure Haven, absorbing the early quiet like armor, for now he was nobody, and that's exactly what he needed to be. By 7 a.m., the resort began to stir. Staff in crisp uniforms moved with rehearsed rhythm, preparing for another day of curated luxury. George kept to the edges, pushing a cart of tools, sweeping fallen leaves, and replacing flickering bulbs. It was astonishing how invisible he had become. The same people who once bowed at his presence now rushed past him without a glance. Charlotte floated through the halls like a swan, elegant and composed. But George noticed the way her smile dropped. The second guests looked away. She frowned at slow service, rolled her eyes at workers cleaning near her lounge chair, and corrected people with a tone just sharp enough to sting. Still, to the public eye, she remained flawless, poised, perfect. At noon, George waited near the side entrance where deliveries were made. A staff member tripped, dropping an entire tray of freshly baked pastries. The glass shattered, frosting smeared across the pavement. Charlotte happened to be walking by. The young server stammered an apology. Charlotte didn't yell. She didn't have to. She simply looked at the girl with a stare that melted any sense of worth. "I assume this means my dessert is ruined," Charlotte said coldly. The girl nodded, on the verge of tears. "Then I expect it to be replaced," Charlotte added, "with something better." She turned, walked off, and didn't look back. George saw the girl sink to the ground, overwhelmed. That was the first crack, a glimpse behind the curtain. Later that day, George was assigned to fix a faulty light in Charlotte's suite. He knocked, was ignored, then entered quietly with his passkey. Charlotte lounged on the balcony, phone in hand, wearing a robe that probably cost more than his entire disguise. She was mid-call, unaware of his presence, until she wasn't. "Who let you in?" she snapped. George kept his voice low. "Maintenance, ma'am. Light in the hallway needs replacing." She stared at him for a long second. "Do it fast, and don't touch anything else." George nodded silently and got to work. But he listened, not out of rudeness, but because information was power. "Yes, I know his dad's loaded," she said into her phone, voice hushed but sharp. "But he's still sweet, harmless, really. Once we're married, everything will fall into place." George's hand froze around the screwdriver. There it was. A confirmation of what he feared, wrapped in velvet words. She wasn't in love. She was hunting a crown. After the call ended, George finished his task and walked out without a word. But something had changed in him. Before, he had suspicions. Now he had evidence, small and slippery, but enough to justify the next phase of his test. He wouldn't confront Ethan, not yet. The truth had to be undeniable, unarguable. So he began planning the next move. Over the next few days, George became a fixture of the background. He was the man who swept up spilled wine, who replaced the air filters, who fixed the ice machine no one thanked. He was in every room Charlotte occupied, and yet not once did she address him kindly, not once did she say thank you, and George made sure to make tiny errors, just enough to draw out her real nature. She complained about room service, demanded new towels when hers weren't folded perfectly. She chastised a young man for leaving a single fingerprint on the glass door. George documented every moment in his notebook at night, under dim light. His list was growing, not of crimes, but of truths. Truths about character, about who Charlotte Reynolds really was. One night, a thunderstorm rolled in, knocking out power across a section of the resort. Panic flickered like lightning among the guests. George, soaked to the bone, worked with the generator team to restore power. In the chaos, he passed by Charlotte's suite. Her lights were out, and she stood in the hallway, furious. "Where is everyone?" she yelled. "I swear, this place is falling apart." George approached her calmly. "We're working on it, ma'am. Should be back in a moment." She looked at him, disgusted. "Why are you dripping water on the floor? Get a towel before you ruin the carpet." Then she slammed her door. That night, George stared out his small window, the rain washing the world clean. But inside him, the storm had only just begun. Charlotte's behavior wasn't just entitled, it was cruel in subtle, calculated ways. He wondered, had she always been like this? Had Ethan truly never seen it? He began writing a letter to himself, a record, in case he forgot why he had done this, why he'd stepped out of luxury and into shadows. Because love, real love, doesn't shrink in the presence of the unseen. It shines brighter, and Charlotte, she didn't shine at all, not when no one important was watching. It was just past noon when the Harrington family's most anticipated weekend began. Ethan had invited a few close friends to join him and Charlotte at Azure Haven for a casual gathering. Laughter echoed across the poolside. Glasses clinked, cameras flashed, and the illusion of a picture-perfect life continued, until George arrived with a tray of fresh towels. A minor act, but one that would start peeling the mask. Charlotte looked radiant in designer swimwear, surrounded by adoring acquaintances. But as George placed the tray near the pool chairs, she turned to him with the same mechanical smile she gave every stranger. "Can't you see we're in the middle of something?" she asked, voice light but loaded. "Maybe try being invisible a little harder." George didn't flinch. "Apologies, ma'am," he said, backing away slowly. Ethan, who'd overheard the comment, gave her a surprised look. "That was a little harsh, don't you think?" Charlotte chuckled. "It's just a joke, baby. Don't be so serious." But something in Ethan's expression said he didn't quite buy it. Later that day, George crossed paths with one of the other guests, Sophie, Ethan's childhood friend. Intelligent, warm, and observant, Sophie had known the Harringtons for years. She stopped him in the hallway as he carried supplies. "You're new here," she said kindly. "George, right?" He nodded. "Nice to meet you," she added with genuine warmth. "You too, miss," George replied. She lowered her voice, smiling. "Don't let Charlotte get to you. She's intense." George gave a polite nod, storing the moment like a mental photograph. Someone had noticed, someone other than him. It was a spark, a tiny confirmation that he wasn't seeing ghosts. The next morning, Charlotte was hosting a private breakfast on the veranda. Staff bustled, arranging everything with flawless precision. George stood at a distance, waiting for his cue to deliver a package from the spa. He watched her bark at a server for pouring orange juice instead of grapefruit. "Is this so hard?" she snapped. "Basic instructions, people." Ethan arrived moments later, missing the altercation. Charlotte immediately softened, greeting him with a kiss and cheerful tone. "Baby, you look tired. Long night." "Just couldn't sleep," he said, scanning her face. "You seem stressed." Charlotte laughed. "Just making sure. Everything's perfect for you." But even Ethan's smile faltered. That afternoon, George approached Charlotte with the spa package. "This is from the wellness suite," he said, extending the wrapped box. She took it without a word, but as he turned to leave, she paused. "Wait," she said, narrowing her eyes. "Have we met before?" George tensed. "No, ma'am, just the janitor." She stared at him for a moment too long, then shrugged. "Right, you all start to look the same." George walked away, jaw clenched. It wasn't just the insult, it was the ease with which she delivered it, as if no one in his position mattered. Later, in the employee break room, George jotted down the phrase, "Not for revenge, for memory, for clarity." This mask of hers, he could feel it thinning. Meanwhile, Ethan confided in Sophie. "Do you ever feel like Charlotte's different around staff?" he asked. Sophie hesitated. "You sure you want my honest answer?" He nodded. "She's charming, but calculated. There's always a performance. And sometimes I think she forgets to perform for people who don't matter." Ethan sat in silence, questions gnawing. That evening, a gala was held in the resort ballroom. Elegant gowns, golden lighting, classical music, Charlotte's element. She moved through the crowd like royalty. George watched from a corner, dressed in a clean maintenance uniform, invisible yet again. But then he saw it. Charlotte speaking to a guest, laughing too loudly, touching his arm too familiarly. A man who wasn't Ethan. George drifted closer, just within earshot. "I'm just saying," the man whispered. "You and I could be something stronger." Charlotte smiled. "Maybe, after things settle." George froze. There it was again, the game behind the smile. She was playing all sides. The next morning, Ethan found a folded note under his door, anonymous, just 4 words. "Watch her closely tonight." He frowned, confused, but the note lingered in his thoughts all day. Who wrote it, and what was he supposed to be looking for? Still, when night fell again, Ethan began watching, closer than ever before. George was done gathering breadcrumbs. It was time to move to the second phase of his test. Not subtle hints, not background noise. He needed to see how Charlotte responded to failure, to loss. And for that, he'd have to change the game completely, but he wasn't ready to show his hand just yet. It started with a missing reservation. Charlotte had planned a private horseback riding experience, complete with a champagne picnic and a personal photographer. But when she arrived at the stables in her custom boots and wide-brimmed hat, no one was there. No horses, no staff. Only George, pretending to sweep straw near the barn. "Where is everyone?" she demanded. George looked up slowly. "Schedule must have changed, ma'am. Perhaps a miscommunication." Charlotte's jaw tensed. "I booked this 3 weeks ago. This is unacceptable." He shrugged, expression neutral. "I just cleaned the stalls." And he walked off, leaving her standing in dust and silence. Later that day, the spa accidentally cancelled her facial treatment, claiming a booking conflict. Then her favorite brand of wine mysteriously disappeared from the cellar. Every detail Charlotte tried to control began to slip, little things. But Charlotte wasn't built for disruption. She was built for precision. Her calm was performative, and George wanted to see what lay beneath it. By midweek, the tension in her movements had multiplied. She snapped at staff more frequently. Her instructions became curt, and her smile, always ready for the camera, began to tremble at the edges. George watched it all unfold from behind the scenes. The perfect facade was cracking, not from a hammer, but from 1,000 pinpricks. Ethan noticed too. "You've been on edge lately," he said one night as they walked through the resort gardens. Charlotte forced a laugh. "The staff's been sloppy. I'm just tired of fixing their mistakes." Ethan looked at her thoughtful. "Maybe they're just overwhelmed. It's been a busy week." Her smile slipped. "Don't defend them." You didn't build this empire to tolerate incompetence. The words clung to the air like fog. That same night, George met with the spa director privately. "You did well," he said quietly. "No need for anything extreme. Just keep letting the little things slide." The director, loyal to William for decades, nodded. "She's unraveling, sir." George didn't smile. He wasn't enjoying this, but it was necessary. Charlotte's true self could only be revealed under pressure, and the pressure was just beginning. The next morning, a scheduled charity brunch turned into chaos. The tables were misaligned. The caterer brought the wrong menu. Flowers arrived wilted. Charlotte stood in the center of it all, directing staff like a general on the brink of mutiny. She did everything herself. Arranged plates, barked orders, rewrote speeches, but even she couldn't hold it all. Ethan approached mid-chaos. "Can I help?" She didn't look at him. "Unless you can get me fresh orchids in 10 minutes, no." He blinked. I said I've got it," she snapped, louder than she meant to. A few heads turned. Charlotte realized, too late. Ethan stepped back silent. After the brunch, barely salvaged, Charlotte found George fixing a light fixture near the ballroom. She stopped in front of him, arms crossed. "You," she said, her voice low, "you've been everywhere lately." George looked up calmly. "Just doing my job, ma'am." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you?" He didn't answer. Just held her gaze. For the first time, she looked unsettled. That evening, she called a private meeting with resort management. "Something's wrong," she told them. "There's been too many errors. Someone's sabotaging me." The staff exchanged glances. No one responded. "I want names," she hissed, but no names came. Back in her suite, Charlotte poured herself a drink. Alone now, with no one to impress, she let the cracks widen. She paced. She cursed under her breath. She scrolled through her phone, looking for reassurance, and found none. Ethan was distant. The staff was unreliable. The universe, it seemed, was shifting, and she no longer controlled the script. Meanwhile, George sat in the supply room, staring at the growing pile of notes he'd collected. Every outburst, every insult, every decision Charlotte made when the world didn't bend to her. This was no longer a theory, it was a pattern. And soon he'd need to make his move. But he knew better than to rush the climax. Let her think she still has the power. Let her fight to keep it. Because when the truth finally came, it would hit her where she least expected. And she wouldn't even see it coming. The mirror in Charlotte's suite had always been a symbol of control. Every morning she stood before it, flawless makeup, perfect posture, curated expressions. But today, the reflection seemed off. She leaned closer, searching for imperfections not on her face, but in her surroundings. Something was different. She felt watched, followed, unsettled, and she hated it. Her phone buzzed with another missed call. Ethan. She hadn't spoken to him properly in 2 days. His silence unnerved her more than she let on. He was pulling away, and she could feel it. "Don't panic," she whispered to herself. "You're just tired." But she wasn't tired, she was spiraling. Because perfection only works when the world obeys the script. Later that morning, she walked the halls of Azure Haven with purpose, surveying every detail, as if she could wrestle order back into her reality through sheer observation. And then she saw him, George, the janitor, standing too still, too composed, watching her for just a beat too long before looking away. The hair on her arms rose. "Excuse me," she said, stopping him. He turned slowly. "Yes, ma'am. You're George, right?" "That's right." "You've been working here long?" she asked, probing but casual. "Just a few weeks," he said evenly. "Trying to keep busy." "Right." Her eyes lingered. "You seem familiar somehow." "People say that," he said with a shrug. "Maybe I've got one of those faces." She nodded, but suspicion lingered in her eyes. As she turned away, she didn't feel relief. She felt watched again. That night, Charlotte couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards felt louder. Every gust of wind against the windows made her heart jolt. At 3:12 a.m., she got up and checked the hallway. Empty. But as she stepped back inside, she caught something in the mirror, her own eyes darting, unsure, afraid. She didn't recognize herself anymore. Meanwhile, Ethan stood by the shore, staring into the night. Sophie joined him, barefoot in the sand. "You look like someone waiting for lightning to strike," she said. "Maybe I am," he replied. "Something's not right with Charlotte." Sophie hesitated. "You don't think she—" "I don't know what I think," he admitted, "but I feel it. Something's hidden." And for once, he wasn't sure he wanted to know. The following day, Charlotte received an anonymous note slipped under her door. 4 simple words: "He knows. Be careful." She read it 5 times, heart pounding. Who? Who knew? George? Ethan? Someone else? She paced the room, note clenched in her fist, chest tight with dread. The walls felt smaller now. The resort no longer felt like her stage. It felt like a trap. At breakfast, she cornered the concierge. "Has anyone new started working recently?" The man blinked. "Just the usual seasonal hires." "Anyone unusual?" she pressed. "Strange? Secretive?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am, not that I'm aware of." But she didn't believe him. Desperate for control, Charlotte began checking staff schedules, poking into rooms, asking loaded questions disguised as curiosity. She tried to catch George in a lie, but he always met her questions with steady, unreadable calm. It made her furious and afraid, because she could sense something in him, like he was playing a game she didn't understand. That evening, Ethan joined her for dinner. She tried to regain her charm, soft laughter, gentle touches, but he saw through it. "You don't seem yourself," he said. "Just tired," she replied. "Tired of pretending?" he asked. The question landed like a slap. She froze, unsure what he knew, what he meant, and what he was hiding. After dinner, Charlotte stood in front of the mirror again, watching her reflection closely. She touched, her face adjusting nothing yet adjusting everything. "You're not losing," she told herself. "You're just adapting." But the whisper of doubt echoed louder than her reassurance. And this time, the mirror didn't smile back. Somewhere else in the resort, George closed his notebook for the night. He had what he needed. Her fear was showing. Her cracks were deepening. And soon, the foundation she had built her life upon would crumble. But not yet. No, not yet. First, she had to be given the illusion of safety again, just long enough for the final reveal to hurt. And Charlotte, she still didn't know who she was truly up against, but she would. The rain came softly that morning, threading mist across the windows of the East Wing. Ethan stood alone near the conservatory, watching droplets trail down. The glass like unspoken thoughts. His breath fogged the surface, but his mind was elsewhere. He was tired, of suspicion, of performance, of wondering whether the love he thought he had was ever real. And then, in the corner of the garden, he saw her. Amelia moved with quiet purpose, kneeling beside a bed of rain-soaked lavender. Her uniform was plain, her posture calm. She didn't notice Ethan watching. She was adjusting the soil gently, as though the flowers might bruise if mishandled. There was no performance in her, no awareness of eyes, just care, just presence. He stepped closer, curiosity outweighing caution. "Most people don't tend to flowers in the rain," he said gently. Amelia looked up, surprised but not flustered. "They bloom better when no one's watching," she replied. Ethan smiled faintly. "That's poetic." "I didn't mean it to be." She stood slowly, brushing mud from her knees. "But I guess it is." George watched from afar, not spying, just observing, the way Ethan leaned in, the way Amelia didn't lean away, the ease between them, natural, unscripted. It stirred something in William that he hadn't felt in years, a memory of Margaret, his late wife, tending the garden with similar hands. Maybe softness wasn't weakness. Maybe silence carried truth. Amelia walked away without asking for praise. That alone intrigued Ethan. Charlotte would have expected compliments, applause even, but Amelia just disappeared into the resort's side entrance, like the moment meant nothing to her. But to Ethan, it did, and it left an ache behind. Later that day, he asked Sophie, "Who's the girl from the garden?" Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Amelia. She's new, works part-time for landscaping, part-time helping in the wellness center. Quiet, kind, doesn't talk much unless she has something to say. She seems different," Sophie smirked. "From Charlotte? That's an understatement." Meanwhile, Charlotte sat in the spa lounge, scrolling through her phone furiously. Every notification annoyed her, every post by her friends felt like a challenge, and every text from Ethan that lacked enthusiasm sent ripples of panic down her spine. Something was slipping. She could feel it, even if she couldn't name it. That evening, fate spun its threads again. Amelia was delivering aromatherapy oils to the executive suites when she nearly bumped into George. He caught her tray before it spilled. "Careful," he said softly. She smiled, grateful but not embarrassed. "Thank you. That would have smelled like a forest fire." He chuckled. "You've got a calm about you. Rare these days?" Amelia tilted her head. "Calm comes from being honest with yourself." William stared at her for a moment, unsure why those words struck so deep. Maybe because they echoed the very thing Charlotte lacked. Or maybe because he hadn't heard that kind of clarity in a long time. He let her go, but her presence stayed with him, like a warm breeze in a cold hallway. The next day, Ethan found Amelia again, this time near the library, stacking unused candles into boxes. He offered to help, and she accepted without hesitation. No questions, no flirtation. Just shared silence and the occasional soft comment about the scent of the wax. It was the most peaceful 30 minutes he'd had in weeks. "You don't seem nervous around me," he said eventually. "Why would I be? I'm not exactly just another guest." Amelia looked at him plainly. "You're someone who helps stack candles. That's good enough for me." Ethan felt something shift inside him. Charlotte noticed. Not the candles, not Amelia, but the distance, the way Ethan looked elsewhere during dinner, the way he didn't ask about her outfit or her day, the way his eyes wandered to the edges of rooms she didn't control. And it terrified her in a way that made her desperate. She planned a surprise date on the yacht, rose petals, imported wine, a carefully tailored playlist. But even as Ethan sat beside her under the sunset sky, he felt further from her than ever. Because love isn't in the setup, it's in the moments that aren't choreographed. And Amelia, she didn't stage anything. She simply existed. William sat near the dock, watching the boat drift into the golden hour. His son looked lost, in thought, and the woman beside him wore the kind of smile that demanded attention. But across the garden path, Amelia watered a row of new blossoms, unaware, uninterested in games or thrones. She didn't know she'd become the quiet axis on which everything would turn, and that made her more powerful than Charlotte ever imagined. A soft drizzle returned the following afternoon, settling over Azure Haven like a whisper. It wasn't enough to cancel plans or disrupt operations, but it changed the tone of the air. Guests spoke a little softer, lights dimmed a little earlier, and everything felt just slightly slower. Except inside Ethan's mind, where thoughts spun like a restless wind. He hadn't planned to see Amelia again. In fact, he'd promised himself not to, But when he stepped outside for air, there she was, pulling empty flower pots under the awning, shielding them from the rain. She didn't notice him at first, humming a tune softly under her breath. A small act, but it made his feet stop moving. "You always work like this?" Ethan asked, breaking the quiet. Amelia looked up, smiling through the rain. "Like what?" "Like no one's watching." She shrugged. "I guess I just forget to perform." He smiled, though it hurt a little. Back in the suite, Charlotte stared out the window, sipping. Wine she didn't taste. Her reflection glared back at her, beautiful, composed, but anxious beneath the surface. She texted Ethan again. "Dinner at 7? No reply. Her fingers tightened around the glass. She wasn't used to chasing. She didn't like how it made her feel. Vulnerable. Ethan and Amelia stood under the awning longer than necessary. A silence stretched between them, not awkward, but dense with awareness. Finally, Amelia said, "You look like someone holding his breath." Ethan blinked. "Maybe I am." "Why?" "Because I don't know who I am with her anymore," he whispered. He hadn't meant to say it out loud. Amelia didn't respond right away. She simply held his gaze, kind but unwavering. Then she said, "Sometimes, losing who you thought you were is how you start becoming who you really are." And then she went back to stacking pots, as if she hadn't just split him open with a sentence. Ethan watched her, wondering how someone so grounded could say so much with so little. That night, Charlotte greeted Ethan with carefully chosen perfume, and a dress he once called his favorite. "You're quiet," she said over dinner. "Just tired," he lied. "You haven't been yourself lately." "Maybe I'm becoming myself," he replied softly. Her smile flickered. Across the resort, George sat with the head of hospitality, quietly reviewing a fabricated staff performance report. "We'll adjust the schedule," he said. "Put Amelia on grounds duty near the main suite." "Any particular reason?" "Observation," George said, "and timing." Because he wasn't finished yet, not nearly. 2 days passed. Charlotte tried harder, planned excursions, dropped compliments, even apologized to a waiter for a mild mistake, but the performance felt hollow. Ethan didn't react. He was present but distant, and she could feel the weight of someone else pulling him away. She just didn't know who yet. That evening, during a break in the weather, Ethan found Amelia again, this time by the old greenhouse. She was tending orchids in silence. "I think I'm in trouble," he told her. Amelia didn't look up. "Because of something you did?" "No," he admitted. "Because of what I'm starting to feel." That made her pause. "You shouldn't say things like that," she said quietly. "Why?" "Because I'm not your escape," she said, finally looking at him. "And you're not mine." Ethan nodded slowly. "I know." But even knowing didn't change what was growing. The next morning, Charlotte spotted them, Amelia and Ethan, speaking near the stables. It wasn't romantic. There was distance between them. But Charlotte recognized something worse than intimacy. Comfort. The kind that didn't need words. And suddenly, her fear had a face, a name. And it wasn't George. Later that day, Charlotte cornered a server. "That girl," she said. "Amelia. I want to know everything about her." The server hesitated. "She's just staff, ma'am." "There's no such thing as just staff," Charlotte hissed. And that night Charlotte didn't sleep, because perfection was no longer enough. Now she would fight, but storms don't always arrive with thunder. Some begin with a whisper and end with silence. The sun crept up slowly that morning, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Ethan stood at the balcony railing, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The air was heavy, not with weather, but with indecision. The path beneath his feet had forked in silence, and now each step felt like betrayal, of Charlotte, of himself, of everything he thought he knew about love. He hadn't kissed Amelia, hadn't touched her, but in some way that made it worse. Feelings born in silence were the hardest to dismiss. They felt truer, less artificial. There was no glamour, no planning, just that steady pull every time she entered the room. And every time she left, a hollow that didn't used to be there. Inside, Charlotte applied her makeup with robotic precision. The mirror was no longer her ally, it was her witness. She was tired, not physically, but emotionally exhausted from holding everything together, from pretending not to notice Ethan's growing distance, from pretending not to know the name that lived quietly behind his silence, Amelia. George walked past Charlotte in the hallway that day. She didn't speak. Neither did he. But as he passed, he noticed something new in her, something fragile. Not remorse, not guilt, but fear. The kind that settles behind your eyes when you know something is slipping and you can't stop it. The moment made him pause, longer than he meant to. Later, Ethan met Sophie on the veranda. She looked at him and said simply, "You're unraveling." He didn't deny it. "I didn't plan for any of this," he confessed. "You didn't have to. Truth doesn't need a schedule." He stared out at the sea. "So, what do I do now?" Sophie put a hand on his arm. "If you marry someone out of fear or obligation, you'll resent them. If you run to someone just because they're different, you might hurt them too. But if you stand still and ask yourself who you are, really, you might find your answer." He was silent, but her words sank in. Meanwhile, Charlotte slipped into the admin office alone. She accessed guest records under the guise of planning an event. In truth, she searched for Amelia's last name, home address, work history, anything. When she found it, she copied it quickly, her hands trembling. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. This was war. Back in the garden, Ethan found Amelia under the shade of an old oak tree, arranging candles for a late event. "Do you believe in timing?" he asked. She looked up. "I believe in readiness. Timing just reveals it." He knelt beside her, heart thudding. "Then what if I'm ready now?" Her breath caught, but she didn't smile. "No," she said softly. "Not like this." Ethan's face faltered. "You don't feel it too?" "I do," she whispered. "But feelings don't matter if they're built on ruins. You're still in something else, and I won't be the escape hatch you crawl through." He looked at her like she'd vanished, but she was more present than ever. That night, Charlotte confronted Ethan. "Are you in love with her?" He didn't lie. "I don't know," he said, and it felt worse than yes. Charlotte's voice broke. "So, all of this, everything we built, it meant nothing?" "No," he said gently. "It just doesn't mean what I thought it did." In a dark hallway near the guest wing, George stood alone, staring out the window. The time was drawing near. Charlotte had revealed her soul, and Ethan had started to hear his own. Now all that remained was the final push, the ultimate illusion, a fabricated downfall, a simulated storm. Only then would every mask fall. Ethan sat on the beach until midnight, his fingers buried in cold sand. He wasn't angry, he wasn't even sad, he was emptied. Because when the heart splits in two, there is no sound, no scream, just silence. And in that silence, a decision must be made, and decisions, once made, change everything. A phone rang at dawn, its tone sharp in the quiet of the Harrington suite. Ethan picked it up groggily, but the voice on the other end snapped him awake. It was the family lawyer, using carefully rehearsed urgency. "There's been a financial breach, a legal complication. We need you and your father back in the city, immediately." It was a lie, but a masterfully crafted one. Every detail had been arranged by William. Charlotte stirred beside him. "Who was it?" Ethan hesitated. "Something about my dad, about the estate." She sat up. "Is it serious?" "I don't know yet," he lied. But he already knew exactly what was coming. An hour later, Charlotte received the curated press leak. planted by William himself. Sources confirm financial instability within the Harrington family business, multiple offshore holdings frozen, debt proceedings imminent. Her breath hitched. Her hand shook as she refreshed the page again and again. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be happening. She found Ethan on the terrace, staring out at the sea. "Tell me it's not true," she demanded. He looked at her quietly. "Would it change anything if it were?" Charlotte blinked, stunned. "Of course it would. Everything's tied to your name, your future, our future." And there it was. That word, our, suddenly felt like a negotiation. Ethan studied her. "Would you still want me if I had nothing?" Charlotte hesitated. Too long. Her answer came wrapped in hesitation. "Don't say that. Don't be dramatic." "Would you?" he repeated. She looked away. "Let's not talk about hypotheticals." "It's not hypothetical anymore," he whispered. Throughout the day, the staff murmured in corners. Guests whispered and speculated. No one knew it was all fiction, a perfect orchestration. Only George, and the loyal few involved, knew that the empire was intact, stronger than ever. But perception was everything, and right now, perception said, collapse. Charlotte's behavior shifted. She cancelled spa appointments, avoided public lounges, began texting friends discreetly, some of whom, strangely, didn't respond. Word was spreading, and the first cracks of social fallout began to show. She clung tighter to Ethan while simultaneously searching for an exit. A dual betrayal unfolding in slow motion. That evening, she met with Ethan privately. "Look," she said, her voice gentler than usual. "I love you. I really do. But maybe we should postpone the engagement, just until things stabilize." Ethan stared at her, heart slow and steady. "Postpone or cancel?" She paused. "Let's just say pause, for now." And that was all he needed to hear. George sat across from William's lawyer that night, finalizing the next piece of the illusion. "Tomorrow," George said, "you'll deliver the last blow, a letter stating foreclosure, public, unavoidable. And I want it delivered in front of her." The lawyer nodded. "She won't survive it." "She needs to see what real love doesn't run from," George replied. The next morning at breakfast, the lawyer arrived with a brown envelope. He placed it in front of Ethan, loud enough for all to hear. "I'm sorry, son. The board voted to dissolve the core trust. Your name is no longer attached to any liquid assets. Immediate effect." Charlotte stared at the envelope as if it were a weapon. "No trust," she said, voice rising. "What does that mean? What about the accounts, the estate?" The lawyer didn't flinch. "Gone. All of it." Charlotte's face drained of color. "You're joking." "No, ma'am." And then she stood up too fast. "I need a moment," she said, walking away with her phone already in hand. George followed her discreetly. She stepped behind the veranda, furiously calling someone. "You said I had a fallback. What happened to your offer?" She hissed into the phone. "Don't ghost me now. I'm not going down with him." George didn't need to hear more. It was enough. By the afternoon, Charlotte was gone. She left without a note, without goodbye. No grand confrontation, no apology. Just absence. The ring Ethan had given her sat quietly on the edge of the dresser, catching the last light of day. And for the first time, the silence didn't hurt. It felt like release. Ethan walked through the empty hallway that evening, passing George without a glance. But then he paused, turned. "You were right about her," he said softly. George nodded just once. Sometimes the truth needs darkness to show its light. Neither said more. There was nothing left to say. But not everyone was watching Charlotte. Someone else had noticed something different, a woman with quiet eyes and hands that never asked for anything, and she was still here. The morning after Charlotte left, Azure Haven was quiet in a different way. It wasn't silence out of grief. It was a breath held too long, finally exhaled. Ethan sat alone in the atrium, surrounded by flowers he didn't notice, drinking coffee that had long gone cold. The ring she left behind rested in his pocket, heavy, symbolic, meaningless now. He didn't cry, he didn't rage. He simply sat with the echo of what could have been. Part of him still wanted to believe it was all real, that some version of Charlotte loved him, but the truth was clearer than it had ever been. Love, when it's conditional, is never love at all. It's an agreement, and she had broken it the moment the terms changed. In the garden, Amelia worked with her hands buried in soil, unaware that Charlotte was gone. She hadn't asked questions, hadn't pried. She moved as she always had, quietly, purposefully, without expectation. George watched her from a distance, something unspoken shifting in him. Her calm didn't feel like ignorance. It felt like strength. Later that afternoon, William, still in his disguise, approached Amelia under the shade of the citrus trees. He carried 2 cups of tea, one for her, one for him. She accepted it with a curious glance. "I thought you only worked inside," she said. "Even janitors need fresh air," he replied. She smiled. "Fair enough." They sat in silence, for a few minutes, sipping. The breeze tugged gently at the leaves above. Finally, William said, "You see people, even when they don't want to be seen." Amelia looked at him, a bit startled. "That's a strange thing to say." "It's a rare thing to do," he answered. "But you do it." She didn't respond at first. Then she said, "I try to notice what others miss. Sometimes that's where the truth hides." William nodded almost reverently. "You remind me of someone I loved once, a long time ago." Amelia's eyes softened. "I'm sorry you lost her." "I didn't lose her," he murmured. "She found peace. I stayed." That evening, Ethan walked through the grounds, unsure where his feet were taking him. He found Amelia near the stone path, trimming overgrown jasmine. "She's gone," he said. Amelia looked at him quietly. "I know. You don't seem surprised." "I'm not," she replied. "Some people stay until there's nothing left for them. Others stay when there's nothing left to take." Ethan sat down on the nearby bench, letting her words settle. "I thought love meant holding on, even when it hurts." She met his eyes. "Real love doesn't ask you to bleed to prove it." He swallowed hard. "Then I don't think I've ever had it." "You might," she said gently, "but only if you're ready to be seen without your armor." The sky darkened early that day, clouds rolling in like tired thoughts. Amelia rose, brushing her hands clean. "You don't owe anyone an answer." "Yet," she said, "not even me." Ethan looked up. "But I want to talk to you." "Then talk when it's not still about her," she said softly. And then she walked away, not as a rejection, but as an invitation. "When you're ready, I'll be here." George stood beneath the veranda, having heard more than he should have. His heart, old and armored, clenched unexpectedly. There was wisdom in Amelia's restraint, in the way she made space for Ethan's grief without demanding his affection. William had orchestrated lies, tested morality, and manipulated trust. But here was a woman whose honesty asked nothing in return. That night, he wrote in his notebook, not about Charlotte, not about Ethan, but about Amelia, about how rare people like her were, how the strongest ones didn't need power to prove themselves, and how, if Ethan had any sense left, he would walk toward her, not out of rescue, but out of respect. Ethan stared at the ceiling in his suite, the rain tapping gently on the glass. He was tired, but he wasn't broken, and for the first time he felt the weight begin to lift, not because Charlotte was gone, but because someone else had stayed. Without demands, without conditions, just presence, and in that presence he felt the stirrings of something real. The wind had changed. Not violently, but with quiet conviction. It swept through Azure Haven like something new was coming. William stood before a mirror, staring at the man he had not seen in weeks. Gone was the worn jacket and utility belt. He ran a hand through his silver hair, brushing dust from the sleeve of a tailored blazer he hadn't worn since the day he disappeared. The time had come. He had watched everything unfold: Charlotte's exit, Ethan's unraveling, Amelia's quiet ascent. It was never about punishment. It was about clarity, and now that the game was over, the truth had to walk into the light. But it wasn't just Ethan who needed to hear it. Amelia did too, because sometimes even the honest need to understand the lies that tested them. That morning, Ethan found a note slipped under his door. No signature, just a location and time. The old lounge, noon. Something in his chest tightened. He sensed the end approaching, not a conclusion, but an unveiling. And when he arrived, the room was empty except for one figure, George, or rather William. Ethan stopped in his tracks. The man before him stood taller, more deliberate, no longer slouched, no more pretense. "Dad?" William nodded, slow and solemn. "I never left, son." The silence was thick. Ethan stared at him, piecing together weeks of memory, betrayal, and invisible observation. "You were here the whole time." "Yes," William said, "watching, testing." "Why?" Ethan's voice broke. "Because I needed to know what love meant to you," William said. "I needed to know what she meant, who she was, when no one needed to impress her. And you needed to know it too." Ethan turned away, pacing, anger and clarity swirling in his chest. "You lied to me. You orchestrated everything." "I did," William said quietly, "and I would again, because the truth saved you." Back in the greenhouse, Amelia trimmed dried petals, unaware that the man who changed her schedule, redirected her path, and placed her next to Ethan was no janitor. She'd noticed the way George watched people, but never with malice. Just attention. She'd trusted him, and now that trust was about to be tested. William walked toward her in the late afternoon, no longer hunched or hidden. "Amelia," he said. She turned. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. But then her eyes narrowed, not in fear, but realization. "You're not who you said you were," she said. "No," he admitted, "but everything I saw in you, that was real." She didn't speak. She waited. "I'm William Harrington," he continued, "Ethan's father. I created this entire facade to understand what my son couldn't see, and in doing that, I saw something else, someone else, worth more than truth itself." Amelia met his gaze. "I'm not angry, just disappointed you didn't trust me to be who I am without a script." William looked down. "I didn't expect you. You weren't part of the test, but you became its answer." Ethan arrived minutes later, finding them mid-conversation. He saw his father. He saw Amelia. And for the first time, all three stood together with nothing left to hide. The triangle of deception, of truth, of rediscovery. "I should hate you for this," Ethan told William. "But do you?" William asked. Ethan shook his head. "I don't know what I feel, but I know what I don't want to feel again: emptiness." Amelia stepped away, giving them space. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She simply walked into the hallway, palms slightly trembling. William followed her out a moment later. "He's not the same man he was when he arrived," he said gently. "I know," she replied. "But that doesn't mean he's ready." William paused. "Would you wait for him?" Amelia turned. Not forever, but long enough for him to find himself. That night, Ethan stood at the cliffside edge of the resort, watching the sea pull itself in and out with quiet resolve. He didn't feel betrayed. He felt reborn, not clean but awake. And as the wind combed through his hair, he realized that everything had led him here, not just Charlotte's exit, but Amelia's presence. The truth had broken him open. Now he had to rebuild. Inside, William watched the stars from his suite. For the first time, there was no disguise, no persona, Just a father who had done what he thought was right, and a son who had to decide what came next. There was nothing more to manipulate, nothing more to test, only time. And time, he knew, was earned. The days that followed were quieter, no press, no parties, no whispers, just routine, honest work. Time moved slower, not out of grief, but necessity. Ethan had stayed behind when most guests left. The resort had returned to its natural rhythm, and he was learning to move with it, no longer the air, no longer the image. Just a man learning to be still. He took morning walks along the shoreline, his shoes sinking into wet sand, his thoughts pulling deeper than the tide. He didn't reach out to Amelia, not yet. Not because he didn't want to, but because she deserved more than words spoken from confusion. He needed to know what he was becoming before he asked her to trust it. William kept his distance. They spoke briefly, but rarely. There was nothing left to argue about, nothing new to uncover, only a quiet, mutual acknowledgement. The test was over. Now came the far harder part, living with the results. William spent more time in the greenhouse these days, not watching anyone, just letting things grow. Amelia's presence remained unchanged. She still worked with her hands, smiled rarely but sincerely, and never asked questions that weren't necessary. She noticed Ethan in passing, on the trails, in the garden, near the maintenance shed, but she never lingered, never imposed. It was as if she knew he needed the space before he could speak without a mask. One afternoon, they found themselves near the rose beds at the same time. Neither of them walked away. Amelia was trimming thorny branches. Ethan knelt beside her, offering a basket without words. They worked like that for 10 minutes. No explanation, no expectation. Just a rhythm of shared purpose. Then Ethan finally said, "Thank you." "For what?" she asked softly. "For not trying to fix me." She paused, hands still. "You're not broken. You're just unlayering." He smiled faintly. "That sounds painful." "It is," she said, "but it's worth it." Later that evening, Ethan visited William's suite unannounced. His father looked surprised to see him, but said nothing. Ethan took a seat across from him. "I understand why you did it," he began, "but I don't forgive it yet." William nodded. "You don't have to. I didn't do it to be forgiven." Ethan's gaze dropped. "Then why?" "Because I couldn't bear to bury your future beside your naivety." It wasn't cruel. It was the clearest William had ever been. Ethan sat with that truth and realized something profound. Not all betrayals are born of malice. Some come from love that's been hardened by time and fear. It didn't absolve it, but it made it human, and for now, that was enough. The next day, Ethan joined Amelia near the old tool shed. She was organizing ropes, hands dusty. He didn't interrupt, just helped. And when she finally looked at him, he said, "I'm still in the middle of something, still sorting who I was from who I want to be." "I know," she said. "Would it be all right," he continued, "if I just stayed close? Without promises?" Amelia met his eyes. "Love doesn't begin with promises. It begins with presence." She said no more, but she didn't walk away. And Ethan felt something settle inside him. Not certainty, but possibility. Later, William watched them from the distance, not with manipulation, but quiet awe. His son had passed the only test that truly mattered, facing his own reflection and choosing to change. That night, Amelia placed a lantern outside her small quarters, a soft light, a simple gesture. Ethan saw it from the guest wing. He didn't interpret it as an invitation. It wasn't a signal. It was a sign. "I'm here. You're not alone. The rest is up to you." And for once, Ethan didn't feel like rushing toward an answer, because sometimes the most important part of love is learning how to arrive without losing yourself along the way. The morning came, gently. No wind, no rain, just a soft light filtering through the clouds like forgiveness. Ethan stood by the window of the old guest suite, watching the trees sway without force. For the first time in weeks, he didn't wake with knots in his chest. Instead, there was a quiet clarity, like his heart had stopped yelling and started listening. He didn't rush. He dressed simply, no watch, no tie. He walked the path behind the kitchen, the one that led through the herb garden and down past the service quarters. He knew where she'd be, not because he chased her, but because her rhythm was predictable in the best way, rooted, like the work she loved. He wanted to meet her there. Amelia was alone, as expected, wiping dew from a line of clay pots. She didn't look up immediately, but when she did, her face didn't change. No surprise, no expectation, just openness, and that's what struck Ethan most. The world hadn't given her luxury, but it had taught her something rarer, how to exist without pretense. "I've been thinking," Ethan began, his voice steady, "about who I was before all this, about the way I mistook silence for security. Applause for love." Amelia kept her hands busy. "And what do you think now? I think I've been running from the discomfort of not knowing, but I'm ready to stop." She nodded, waiting, letting him find his own words. "I'm not here to ask for anything," Ethan said. "I don't need a response. I just need to say this out loud. I don't want to be a man who builds love on comfort. I want to build it on truth. And if that journey begins with me, then I'm ready to say yes, to myself, to starting again, without armor." Amelia stopped wiping. She set the cloth down and turned to him slowly. "You're not asking for anything," she said softly, "but you're giving something, and that matters." Ethan smiled, a small one, but the first, genuine smile in a long time. "Then maybe we can share something. Not everything, not yet, just something." They walked together after that, not as lovers, not as promises, but as people who knew that healing begins in small steps. The garden path was silent, save for the sound of shoes brushing gravel. There were no dramatic declarations, no hand-holding, just presence, and it was enough. Later, William saw them from the library window. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. His son looked different now. Still Ethan, but uncoated. There was no performance in his steps, no desperation in his gaze. William had feared that his test would harden Ethan, but instead it had broken something open. That afternoon, Ethan sat with William for tea. No confrontation, no hidden motives, just conversation. "I still don't know if I trust you completely," Ethan said. William nodded. "You shouldn't, not yet." "But I see why you did it," Ethan continued, "and I'm grateful, angry but grateful." "That's a start," William replied. "We rebuild from there." Later, Amelia returned to her quarters to find a folded note resting on the garden bench outside her door. It was unsigned, but the handwriting was Ethan's. It read, "This isn't a confession. It's a beginning. Thank you for teaching me how to be still enough to hear myself again." She didn't cry. She didn't run to him. She simply folded the note, placed it inside her drawer, and watered the rosemary by her window. Because real beginnings don't demand a reaction. They leave space for one. That night, the lantern outside Amelia's door remained unlit. Not as a sign of absence, but as an answer to Ethan's first, "Yes, you've taken the step. Now walk with it. And maybe, if the light returns tomorrow, it will mean something more." But for tonight, the silence was enough. And in that silence, something sacred held steady. Morning arrived without ceremony. No bird song, no breeze, just a calm that felt earned. Ethan stood at the edge of the hill overlooking the southern fields, arms crossed over his chest, eyes scanning the horizon. It was strange, the way stillness had once felt like emptiness, and now felt like peace. Behind him, the world continued. Staff moved through daily rituals. William attended a quiet board call, but Ethan stayed outside, waiting for nothing in particular. For the first time in years, he wasn't making plans. He wasn't running toward the future or away from the past. He was just here. And that, he realized, had always been the missing piece. Amelia moved as she always did, before the day asked too much of her. She swept the east courtyard, watered the tender sprouts growing by the wall, and avoided thinking too much. But something pulsed quietly beneath her ribs, a kind of awareness, not of fear, but of possibility. She had seen Ethan's eyes yesterday, and she had believed them. That evening the sun slipped behind clouds earlier than expected. The air cooled. Ethan sat on the bench near the garden, an unspoken habit now. He didn't wait in desperation. He didn't hope with urgency. He just let himself be present to whatever came. And when the light began to fade, he turned his head slightly toward Amelia's quarters. For a moment, nothing changed. The windows remained dark, the silence pressed in. But then, the lantern flickered on, not bright, not blazing, just steady. A quiet warmth against the coming night. Ethan didn't smile. He didn't stand. He just closed his eyes for a moment, letting the truth of it settle inside him. Not a victory, not a romance, a recognition. Two people standing still enough in themselves to see one another clearly. Inside, Amelia placed her book down beside the window. She hadn't lit the lantern for him to rush over. She lit it to answer. A question he hadn't asked with words. "I'm here. I see you. You're not alone." She didn't wait for footsteps. She didn't need them. The lantern would speak for itself. William, passing the hallway window, saw the light. He paused. It wasn't his to witness, but still it filled him with something soft and rare. He hadn't engineered this, hadn't planned it, and that perhaps was why it meant so much. Love, when it is real, needs no staging, only space. And finally, there was space. That night, Ethan wrote again. Not a letter this time, just thoughts, fragments of what he was learning. Love doesn't rush, it doesn't perform, it doesn't beg to be seen, it waits, grows, grounds itself. And when it's ready, it walks with you, not ahead, not behind, but beside you, only then. Amelia sat by the open window, tracing the pages of her worn journal with her fingertips. She didn't write that night. She didn't need to. Her words had already been given, in her silence, in her patience, in the lantern. Some messages don't require ink, only light. The moon rose gently. No fanfare, no storm. Ethan returned to his suite, passing the now lit lantern with quiet reverence. He didn't knock, he didn't intrude. He simply whispered beneath his breath, "Thank you," and continued on. He didn't know what tomorrow held, but he finally trusted himself enough not to fear it. And in another room, across from flickering, at candlelight, William folded away the last page of his journal. The test is over, but the lesson begins now. Let love teach where control cannot. Because truth doesn't arrive with thunder. It walks in gently, and it stays when the world goes quiet. The final morning at Azure Haven came softly. Mist curled over the hills, wrapping the grounds in silver. It felt like the end of a season, not just a chapter. William stood by his window, dressed in full for the first time in weeks, not as George, not as the patriarch, but simply as a man ready to leave the past behind. He was going home. Ethan met him at the main entrance. No speech, no resentment, just a son looking at his father with new eyes. "You still going to keep testing people?" he asked. William shook his head. "I think I've tested enough for one life." Ethan smiled. "Then maybe we both passed something we didn't know we were taking." They embraced, awkward but true. Amelia remained in the garden that morning, pruning quietly. She hadn't asked Ethan to say goodbye. She hadn't planned anything for his last day at the resort. That wasn't her way. She believed in space, in timing, in letting things be what they are, not forcing them into what they're not. Still, she hoped. For one last walk. Ethan found her near the greenhouse, arms dusted with pollen, eyes calm. He stood nearby until she looked up. "You're leaving," she said. He nodded. "For a while." She waited. "I need time to build something real, on my own. Not to prove anything, just to know that I can." Amelia didn't flinch. "Good. Everyone deserves their own beginning." Ethan stepped closer. "I don't want to ask for anything right now." "I know. But if I come back, and I'm someone who knows himself better, would it be all right if I found you again?" She smiled softly. "If I'm still here, I'll answer." It wasn't a vow. It wasn't a promise. It was something better, freedom wrapped in respect. Amelia extended her hand, and Ethan took it, just for a moment. Just enough. Then he let go and walked the garden path alone, not as a man escaping failure, but as someone stepping into his own weight, with balance. William watched from the car as Ethan approached. "Ready?" Ethan nodded. Finally. As they drove away, the resort faded behind them. But something remained, something unspoken, not closure but opening, a new beginning for both of them. Back at Azure Haven, Amelia returned to her work. She didn't wait at the window. She didn't check for messages. She simply lit her lantern again that night, not for Ethan, not for hope, but for herself, because light, she believed, should never depend on someone else's footsteps. It should burn because it's true, and it did. Far from the noise of old expectations, far from the broken scripts of conditional love, 3 lives moved forward. One tested, one transformed, one stayed steady. No fireworks marked the moment, no final kiss, just the quietest truth of all. Love is not what you say when someone is watching, it's how you stay when no one is. And in that silence, the story ended, not with a goodbye, but with a beginning. If you've made it this far, let us know what you thought about the story. And if you're not subscribed yet, don't forget to subscribe to catch all our upcoming stories.